Hello, video 7 in the developer overview series. I think it's 7, I'm starting to lose track now. In this one, I want to start talking about workflow using the event engine. We're probably going to split this into probably 3 videos. This first one's going to be quite short. We're going to do smart plans or execution engine plans, which are scripted workflow processes. But before we start, I need to give you an overview as to how workflow works and its asynchronous nature in Sherdo. So I'll switch across to my browser and sign in, and I'm going to use some of the configuration tools to kind of explain what is actually happening in the background. So I'm going to go to the modeler and I'm going to go to workflow, and in here I'm just going to go into triggers. I'm going to add a trigger. Don't need to really worry about what I'm talking about here at this point. What I wanted was this list of stuff. So the way that Sherdo works is it uses an eventing mechanism. So whenever you do anything in Sherdo, pretty much any button you click, anything that involves the mutation of data, it raises events into our event store and our event engine system. So the events are, if you're familiar with anything like CQRS and event sourcing, it's not quite that. So we don't publish events for every data change and then hydrate our read models from subscriptions against those events. We're using eventing as more of like a really fast way of doing message queues effectively. So you click a button in Sherdo. So let's say you've got a task that's got an action plan on it where you can click the tick box to say that that action plan item is complete. Sherdo at that point will raise this event, the action plan item complete event. So the very specific, domain specific events that are being raised into the system, into the eventing system. And you can see there's quite a lot of different types of events. Some of these are used more often than others. So for example, finance budget phase changed may not get raised that often, and you might not write plans or workflows that hang off the back of that, but you will typically write a lot of plans that are to do with when you create a task, when you create a work item, which in this case would be Sherdo created, when you do things like phase transitions. So as you move a work item between its phases in its finite state machine, you get the Sherdo phase changed event. So Sherdo is constantly sat there delivering the UI and the API to the user. The user is interacting with it. As those interactions happen, it raises events into the event store. So those events are then sat there effectively in a queue. We then have the event engine that subscribes to that queue. So this is where the asynchronous nature comes in. So as you click the button, it's raised the event, but nothing has happened in response to the clicking of the button. So if you wanted to create a task on the back of the user clicking something and raising an event, so maybe a phase change, there could be a small delay between the point where they click the button and the task actually appearing in the task list. Everything to do with events is asynchronous, so it becomes eventually consistent. Those things are still pretty fast, and we tend to scale up our SaaS infrastructure based upon your usage. So if you are creating queues of events that are taking too long to get through and too long to process and stuff, we will typically automatically scale up some of your nodes in the background to give you more processing power to increase the amount of throughput. But typically you'd be waiting, no more than 30 seconds for a task to be raised in response to, say, a phase change event. So what we're going to do, after the event's been raised and you've got these subscribers that are against them, one of them is the execution engine. And the execution engine will sit there, and when it receives an event of a particular type, we can then create workflows that get triggered on the back of that event being received. So as the phase change event comes in, we might have a trigger that says go and run this workflow, go and run this particular visual workflow, or go and run this particular scripted workflow. And that's what we're going to do now. So we're going to start off by going into EE workflows. Now this is a list of all of the execution engine plans, both visual and scripted, that can be triggered under various conditions, but it doesn't mean that they are triggered. The trigger screen is the place where you define the triggers, and we'll see that in more detail in a sec. What I'm going to do first though is I'm going to go into the workflow list and I'm going to create, and you can see you can create scripted plans and visual workflow plans. You can also go back one direction. You can create a visual workflow to scaffold out a script plan, click a button, and it will give you the script that you would paste into the script editor to be able to then go manually change it if you wanted to do it that way. Visual workflow is the preferred way of building workflows, I should point out, but visual workflow is just a layer that sits on top of the scripting engine. So as you're building out the actual workflow steps and you're connecting it with lines and it's all drag and drop, it's the business analyst as well that's typically doing that rather than a developer. As they are doing that design, when they hit the save button, it actually generates a script in the background. So it maintains the diagram that you've created for the user to go back and edit it, but the actual thing that gets run against the execution engine is the script that it generates in the background. So let's start with a script. Let's create a new script plan. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it A1 Workflow 1. Obviously you would name these much better than I am about to and put actual text in there. Now this is the script. On the left hand side we've got steps that will be executed. A step is effectively a container for retry, so if anything goes wrong during the execution of one of these steps, you'll be able to see that it's gone wrong in the process list, and you'll be able to click the retry button and it retries the entire step. So what you don't really want to do is in any given step, so such as main here, is you don't want to create a task and then create another task. If you do that and the creation of the second task goes wrong and you click the retry button, you're going to get the first task again, so you're going to end up with duplicate tasks. Anyway, that aside, every smart plan has to have a start and an end state. So I'm just going to basically say that the main here is both the start and the end. And I'm not going to do anything yet other than I'm just going to use this log object that's passed into us to log an informational message to the execution log, which we'll see what this means in a second, that just says hello world. And that's all I'm going to do for now. So I'm going to save that. And this is all version controlled, so I'm going to say commit that as version 1. Right, so that's my plan. Its entry point is main, its exit point is main, it's going to start, it's going to log a message, it's going to stop. So let's just duplicate this tab, and I'm going to go to the triggers. What I want to do now is take that plan and hook it up to when it should execute. I can make that plan execute on multiple triggers if I want to. All I'm going to do in this instance though is I'm going to basically say whenever we have a work item that's of type matter and we receive the event of phase changed, it's asking me for the schedule type again, the work item type again now, because whilst I've said it's against, the trigger is against anything that's matter or its derived types, for me to be able to choose the phases that I'm interested in it moving to, I need to pick a type for this design screen, because all of these different types that are under here could have different phase models. It could just list all of the phases, but that could become cumbersome as well, and you could have things that are named differently in terms of the display names. So I'm just going to say schedule type is matter, and I'm going to say whenever it moves to abandoned and whenever it moves to handling. Then I'm going to trigger something. I'm going to trigger a script plan, and the plan that I'm going to trigger is the one that I've just created. Now, what did I call it? I called it A1 Workflow 1. And I'm going to start it at the main entry point. You can have multiple entry points in a scripted plan, so you could bundle up a bunch of different behaviors into one script and call different entry points under different trigger conditions. Not necessarily the recommended way to do that. You want to keep everything in terms of workflow kind of decomposed down to its smallest unit of work. So if you had you would never build a process, a workflow process, either visual or scripted, that basically manages a case moving from the start of its life to the end of its life. Because if that life was like 3 years, you've got an instance of a workflow that's running for 3 years, and then you start to get into problems in terms of deploying updates to the workflows themselves when you've got hundreds of them in flight and they're lasting 4 years. So what you'll typically do is you'll take the workflow for a process and you'll decompose it down into the individual events and steps that can be executed independently and tie them all together. Effectively, the state model of the work item becomes the controlling process, if you will, and then the workflows that trigger in response to certain events are the individual prescriptive or assistive workflows that help you get little parts of the overall process done. So what we've created there is we've created a trigger that says anytime any matter reaches the phase of abandoned or handling, then I want to trigger that plan that we've just created. So I'll save and close that. I'll go back to my work. In fact, before I do that, let me show you something. So what we're going to demonstrate as part of this is against any matter that doesn't have an overridden phase model, we've got this loop here where you can go from abandoned to handling backwards and forward. I'm just doing that as a matter of convenience so that I can basically trigger the smart plan that we author now just by doing a phase transition and keep going backwards and forwards between these phases to re-trigger that process. You can also add smart plans and workflows to menus, so you can create a menu option that will just trigger a workflow. Okay, so that's our plan. It's just going to log the phrase hello world to the execution log. So let's have a look what that means. If I go into one of the cases, so I'll go to this one, and on the more menu, we've got a view processes option. So this is showing me the processes that are executing for this particular work item, and there's nothing in there at the moment. So if I do a transition from here to abandon, that's going to move it into that abandon phase, and it's going to start that process because we've defined that trigger against it. So just refresh the process list. You can see I've now got a process running. It's A1WF1, which is what we called it, and it's run to completion. It was started and finished at the main entry point. And if I click this, I get the log for what happened during the execution of that step. And of course, I outputted the words hello world. So that's all well and good, but we aren't really doing anything useful. So what we'll do is we will create a workflow that's multi-step. So it'll start in main, and it's going to create a task. It's going to give that task to somebody. When that task is complete, so when the user opens it and completes it, it's going to trigger another event back into this plan to say continue at the next step. You'll see it all in code in a minute. Now, there's loads of APIs and stuff that you can use in JavaScript helpers, so you can do things like helpers.get participants enroll and stuff like that. And the documentation for that should be available on help.shodo.co.uk. But the documentation is also living documentation down here in this snippets explorer. So if I want to create a task, there's lots of little snippets in here that will build code for me and just let me then go and change it. Now I want to create a task, so I'm going to say task. Maybe I'll search for create instead. Task builder, basic task. I think that's the one that I want to use. I click this button and it inserts the code that I need to build a basic task into my editor above. So this is using something called the Fluent APIs. So we expose a bunch of these to the Smart Plan editor that let you do things in kind of a fluent syntax way, where you go something dot with a title dot for a Shodo dot assign this to this person, you know, that kind of thing. So what we're going to do is, first of all, it's important to know that every event comes with a payload of data. So the three things that are being passed into this function at the top are the event that caused this step to execute, the context, which is for the instance of this workflow that's running, I can store data and parameters and things in there. And log is obviously what we've already seen, it's the output log. So in the event that triggers this, I'm expecting to find the ID of the work item that it was triggered against and the ID of the user that triggered it. So I'm just going to transfer those from the event into the context so I can use them across multiple steps. So we'll say context.ShowDoID equals EV data ShowDoID. And then I'll also do the same with user ID. The user ID is EV data user ID. And I can put whatever I want in here. I can say, you know, var x equals hello. I can do whatever I want. The context, as long as it's a serializable thing, so it's a JavaScript object or something that can be converted to JSON and persisted somewhere, then you can put whatever you want in there. And then we move into the Fluent builder, saying actions.ShowDo.build tasks. So it gives us access to the task builder. All this is a convenience mechanism that allows you to write script that's a little bit more readable compared to basically calling the APIs. So I can also do the exact same thing by doing actions.ShowDo.http.post and then passing in a JSON payload. I can call the public APIs. I can do basically whatever I want as part of this script. But for the demo, I'm just going to use this helper object, build task. I'm going to give it a title, do something. I'm going to give it a type. It's just going to be a basic task. I'm going to say associate that task that I create under the matter or project or whatever it is that triggered the event against. So we stored into context.ShowDoID above the ID of the work item that this plan was triggered for. So that's valid. Then I'm going to assign the role of primary owner to, that should be user ID. So I'm going to create a task, call do something. It's going to be a child of the matter or project, whatever, that the event was triggered for. And I'm going to assign the owner of that task to the person that caused it to be triggered. I'm going to say it's due on now, but in 1 hour. And then I'm going to save it. But that isn't the end of the story, because what I want to do is now wait for that task to be completed. So when the owner opens it up and they choose to complete or not to do it, whatever they choose as an option, the task will ultimately move to a phase that is marked as not open. And at that point, I want it to do something else. I want it to perhaps send a notification to some people. Before we do that though, I'm going to just run this just to see the task get generated, because we also need to go and do some housekeeping to create a new notification type. So I'm going to call this version 2, I'll hit save, go back to my case, trigger it to run again by doing that transition that triggers the trigger, that triggers the plan. So I've got another instance running now that is completed. It's gone to the main entry point. I've got nothing in the log because I didn't log any messages out, but theoretically I should now have a task in my work list. And there it is, go do something. And it's assigned to Wendy System Admin because I was the one that triggered the workflow. So I'll complete it just so I can get rid of it off my task list. Okay, let's go back to the process list. And I'll just get rid of these now that they're completed, just to clean up a little bit. The other thing I want to do is, just whilst I'm developing this process, I want to see my work list on here as well, save me keep jumping around. So I'm going to go and modify the portal for this type. So I'm going to go into this types portal editor, and I'm going to go to the hidden page of process. Before I do that, I will go to work list, go into the tasks all, and I'll just copy that widget that lists all the tasks. Then I'll go into processes and I'll just paste that below there so I can see my task list as well. Because I've changed portal definition, got to click the reload button. And now I should have on here my list of active processes plus my task list. And there we go. Okay, that's good. Now, once that task's completed, I'm going to want it to jump to another phase, and then I'm just going to send a notification. But before I can send a notification, I need to add a notification type to the system that I can use. So I'm going to go into admin and I'm going to go into channels and notification types. So the admin channels section is where you go for everything to do with comms, and a notification is a type of comms. And the in-app notifications are the things that I'm interested in. I'm going to create a custom notification type that will sit in here, that when the user completes that task, it's just going to notify a bunch of people. So I'm going to create a new notification type, and I'm just going to call it general notification. For general notifications, blah, 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 you get the idea. So I'll just put default title. We're going to actually specify what the default title and message, what the actual title and message is when we raise the notification. But you can do things in here like when I raise a notification against a work item of this particular type, I can then use Data Composer as usual to basically start doing some token replacement stuff and build up the string that I want in the title and message. But I'm just going to set that from the execution engine plan. I'm going to put it into the category of system. The priority is going to be, let's make it information. I'll make it blue. Users can configure it, and then I'm going to say in-app notifications are enabled and are the default for this notification type. You can also turn on things like email now for instant email notifications. So as my smart plan raises the notification, not only will it appear in the app if I'm signed in, but it'll also send me an email or an SMS or any other channel that you've got configured. So let's hit save. I've now got a new notification type called general. So let's go back to our code. Now, what I want to do is, I don't want main to be the endpoint anymore. So I'm going to turn off the end state for main because I want to create another one called, let's call it finish. And again, that will be passed an event, but this time it won't be the event that started the process. That was the event that was passed to the main function. This time that event will contain kind of like the callback trigger that we're about to set up in a minute. That is the thing where the task moves to an end phase. The event that causes that to happen is the thing that will be populated in this particular event. Context is shared between the steps, so anything that I've put in the context in the main method I've got access to in finish, and it's log again. All I'm going to do for now, come back to the notification in a minute, I'll just put log information to do notification. All right. Now, at the point where this task is created, I want this to now jump to finish when the task is completed. So my workflow will run, it'll create the task, and then the workflow will go to sleep. Only when the user then completes the task will this workflow wake back up, and it'll jump to the finish step and execute whatever's in here. So there's some additional methods available on this build task helper. We've got the new notification type set up, so I'm ready for that. So let's go snippets again, and we have in here a snippet for complete, I think it is, on complete trigger. So I'll select that, insert it into my code, and you can see I'll just get rid of the commented stuff. I can see it just gives me another extension of .onComplete. So when the task is complete, what step do I want to run? I want to run finish. So let's save that. And this is version 2, I think. And we'll go back to our process list and task list, make sure there's nothing in there. Let's progress that milestone to trigger it again. We should get an active process that now doesn't automatically stop. It's created my task, but you can see if I go into this that I've done something wrong. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. I have, in my steps, I've forgot to expose this finish method, and I've also forgot to expose it from here, and I've forgot to define it in the steps block. Schoolboy error on my part, that one. So I'm going to go in here and go add a new step. And then I need to set this as the step name is finish. It's the end state. So that's good. And then I need over here to actually expose that finish method. Otherwise it won't work anyway. Right, I should have got it right this time. So let's call that version 2.1. Right, okay, it's back over here. I'm just going to delete that record. I don't want that process to run anymore. It's erroneous. And I'm going to complete that just so I can clean up. Okay, let's do the milestone transition again. That executes my plan, creates the task, and then should be sat there waiting to do the next thing. So the active process, there we go, that's better. So the main entry point has run, it's done its thing, whatever that was, it was creating a task, but now you can see we've got finish has appeared in the list, and it says that this is going to get triggered when the task, do something, is completed. And in my task list, sure enough, I've got the do something task. And if I go into there, and no matter which path I choose, as long as it ends up in an end state, it's going to wake that process back up and move on to its next thing. So let's open that up now. You see it's gone through to finish, and we've logged the message to do notification. So my process is working, that's all good. I've got rid of my task. Let's just get rid of that record so it cleans up. So what we need to do now is we've got the task. Sorry to keep reiterating things, but it's important to understand what it's doing. We've got the task that's been created that's got a particular title of a particular type. We've assigned it to a particular user. It's due in an hour, and we're saying once that task has been created, the process goes to sleep and it waits for that task to be completed. When the task is completed, the process wakes back up and it executes the finish method, and in here we're now going to raise a notification. So I'll go into my snippets again and I'll search for notifications, and I'll use the notifications builder. So that's inserted again, another helper, just like the action should do build task, we're doing build notification. So the with system name is the name of the notification type that I created earlier. We call that general. I'm going to give it a title of I don't really know, the case closure is complete. Case closed. We're going to send it, make that notification. So when you get a notification, you can optionally have these buttons on there. So this one is related to this task, this one is related to this task, and that's controlled by setting this for Shodou ID. Now we've got the ID of the matter to which this process was kicked off for, and that's in ctx.ShodouID. So I'll set it to that. I'm just going to send it to ctx.userid, which is the person that started the whole thing, but I could send it to a list of users or teams. I can send it to roles, excuse me. So on the matter, there will be things like contributors in there, which contains a bunch of teams or people who are contributing on that matter. You can specify 2 role contributors, and it will send this notification to all of those people. For the demo though, I'm just going to send it back to the user that started this, and that's going to be the end of this process. So this is v3 final. Hit save, and now if we run the process again, what we should see is our process runs. It's done what it did before, so it's clearly created the task. I've got no new notifications because I've not got to that stage yet. I hit the do something task and I complete it. That moves it to an end state, which wakes this process back up again. This process wakes up and completes. It will now have sent me the notification I'm looking for. There's nothing in the logs because I didn't log anything. The notification bell refreshes, I think it's every 30 seconds, or I can just refresh the page to get it to reload it immediately. I'll do that because I don't like waiting. Okay, so I've now got a notification. The case closure is complete, case closed, with a link back to this particular matter that I can click, and I can dismiss the notification. Okay, so let's have a look where we got up to. We created a script plan that executes when that particular trigger gets called, which is when it moves between in or out of the abandoned or handling phases. It creates a task. When the task is complete, it sends a notification. It's quite possibly the simplest smart plan you could imagine, but hopefully it gives you a flavor of what you can do. You can do pretty much anything in these scripts. It's just standard JavaScript. So you can call external APIs, you can call any of the Sherdo APIs, you can run calculations, you can call various helper methods that we give you as part of the plan infrastructure to go and get people that are in certain participant roles and things like that. You can basically do anything. I do want to show you one more thing actually, and that's to do with the resiliency of these things. So if I intentionally introduce a bug, let's say in here, I just want to show you, I don't know what I'm doing there. If I intentionally introduce that bug, I just want to show you what happens when things go wrong. So let's call that V5. Because the processes themselves are resilient. So I go to view processes and let's trigger it. Let's just get rid of that one that's already run. Right, trigger the process. This should immediately go into an errored phase. So you're seeing here that the state is errored, and you can set up notifications and stuff to email people when plans go wrong and when things blow up like this. But the important part is when you click on it, you get to see why it blew up. So you see it blew up at the main entry point, and if I go and look at the log, it tells me why it blew up. Now, I can now click this button, which is to retry the step, and I can do that over and over again. So the steps have got some resiliency built into them in the fact that it'll do retries. If you're poking APIs and stuff, it'll retry poking the APIs until it's failed 3 times and that kind of stuff. There's resiliency down at the event level where the competing consumers that are subscribing to those events, if something goes wrong with the event delivery, they will retry and pick the message back up again. And then there's resiliency here at the code level as well, where if you get something wrong and you create a syntax error or even an API call completely fails, so it tries to poke an external API that fails 3 times in a row, then you're going to get into a state like this where it shows it as errored. And you can click this retry button as many times as you want after you've maybe fixed the networking problem or the data problem that you've got that's causing it to fail, and you can keep going back and seeing what's wrong. In this case though, I know it's a plan error, so I can edit the plan, which I can do from here. So I've got it open in the other tab, but I can do it from here as well just by looking at the process record that's running. I can click the drop down edit plan, and I can see that I've missed the closing brace there, closing bracket. I can hit save and call this version 6, or what I could also do is I can look at the history. So the history in version control is showing me what's changed. So if I look at the last thing that was committed and click show changes, I can see that I deleted a bracket off the end of onComplete. So it's easy enough for me to see what has changed and what may have therefore introduced my issue, and I can roll back to that version if I want to just by cutting and pasting it and saving it as a new version. So this one's now version 6. Okay, so I've updated my plan. I can now go back into this and retry it, and it'll retry that step again. This time, now that I've fixed the bug, it'll go through and do what it's supposed to do. So I just want to clean this up, ready for the next demo. So I'll complete that, which will then complete my process. And let's clean that up as well. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a good understanding of what you can do with smart plans, specifically with coded workflows. In the next one, we're going to take that example. So what we just did there was very straightforward stuff. We created a task and then a notification that came off the back of it when the task was completed. What we're going to do in the workflow one is build something that's much more complicated, but we're going to use the Visual Designer. Excuse me. That's it for now though. Next time. Cheers.